Good morning. It's always a great honor and pleasure to speak with Gopal Krishna Gandhi. I'd like to acknowledge Tara Gandhi, who's also in the audience. We go back many, many years. Tara's parents and my parents were friends way back whenever. But it's always an honor to have former Governor Gopal Krishna Gandhi speak. And in this case, about his grandfather and his letters, his grandfather's letters to his father. I'm going to just ask Gopal to make a few opening comments before we start the question and answer. This is Gopal and Tara's first time in Colorado and in Boulder, and I think we all need to sort of acknowledge that they've made their way from so very far to be here with us today. Gopal, thank you so much for coming to JLF here in Boulder, Colorado.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's on.
It's on. Yeah. Thank you very much for your generosity, Sanjay. And thank you all of you for having come in such encouraging numbers to this morning session of this glorious day. When I was coming into Colorado yesterday, there was a gentleman who was driving us from the airport into Boulder City. And I got talking to him, and so did all of us, and I said, now where does the river Colorado start? Does it start in the state? He said, no, I think it starts a little outside the state. I said, my gosh, I'm coming to a state in the United States which is named after a river, from a country which is also named after a river, which is Indus. So that's a great connection between India and Colorado. And then, again, as in India, so with Colorado, the river doesn't start within the boundaries of the country or the state, a little outside. But in India, which is named after the river Indus, the river starts in what is now the Tibet part of China, then comes through India a little bit and down through Pakistan, linking these three countries, China, India and Pakistan, which is a great thing for me to recall when we are talking about Gandhi. But Sanjay said I should make an opening remark, and my opening remark is the following. If I was not the grandson of the person I am the grandson of, nobody would have had half a second of time to waste on me. I could have been governor, ambassador, whatever, but nobody would have had any time. And I know, therefore, that the sole credentials for my being here are ascent by descent. That's how it is. And seeing a delightful, lovely little child in the audience, I must also say that when I was called to a school with a hall like this with lots of books in it, and the children were told that they were going to see the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi, they were all expecting to see a grandchild like a child. And when they saw this elderly gentleman coming up, they were so disappointed. So this is how it is about Gandhi. And with Sanjay's concurrence, I just say this, most people think of Gandhi as having been always what he looks like in his pictures, his bald head and teacup ears, the staff in his hand, being extremely witty and wise, brave and humble. But he was a family man in every sense of the term, deeply devoted to his parents, and deeply devoted to his wife, who presented him with 4 sons, no daughters, which is a great pity for him, I think. He would have been a fuller person if he had had daughters, but 4 sons. The youngest of who was my father, whose correspondence with his dad is the subject of this book, which we are going to talk about. And the title, Scorching Love, comes from a reference he makes to another nephew of his, saying, my affection for my family scorches very often. It does. And how that happens in the course of his correspondence, in the course of his conversations with his 4 sons and their wives, that is, his daughters-in-law and their grandchildren, we will explore as Sanjay asks some questions.
Could I just ask for the monitors to be increased so that Gopal can hear the questions? Just a little bit more sound on the monitor.
Well, I could hear the claps.
So as he said, Scorching Love is quite a book, and it's not necessarily that he's been invited just because he's Gandhi's grandson, but more because of some of the writing that he's done over the years. One of the books is available at the Boulder bookstore, which is Restless as Mercury, which was the earlier book. Scorching Love hasn't arrived yet. We hope that it arrives. And you may have a chance to buy it later at the Boulder bookstore. Mr. Gandhi, can I ask you first to just give the audience a sense of the family? So it wasn't necessarily only the 4 sons. He had this larger group that he always instructed, his secretaries, his great supporters, the Nehrus, everybody. So his family was not just the 4 sons and their immediate siblings and extended family.
His wife, Kasturba, Kastur as she was called by her parents, was 13, as he was 13 when they got married. This was the custom of the times. She was a little older, and she was much more than a little smarter and wiser than her teenage husband. She was his world. And he was, as he himself says, extremely possessive of her, which is not something which she particularly liked, because she wanted to be her own person. She says she does not say this, he says that she was extremely independent, would go where she wanted, do what she liked, and he wanted her to be trained by her to live according to his life. What does a 13-year-old man know about how life should be like? But then that is how it was. That's how it continued throughout their long life. She died at the age of 75 and he at 79. And as Sanjay said, his time in England as a student, then in South Africa as a barrister and as a publicist for Indian causes and an activist for Indian causes, and indeed a leader of the Indian community there, saw a large number of associates who were of his persuasion become almost like members of his family. I am sure straining Kasturba's patience to the full. They were in and out of his house. His house was just a house like anybody else's, but then he soon set up larger establishments into which his colleagues and their families all came. And he became a householder for a much larger entity than his own biological family. When he moved to India from South Africa, there were 3 major settlements called ashrams, where again, the entire political leadership and the masses of India in one form or the other kept coming, all of them calling him in the Hindi, Gujarati word Bapu, which means father, looking upon him as father, and he looking upon them as part of his extended family. Did that dilute his links with his own biological family? To some extent, yes, but also not so. For he was, among many other accomplishments, which were like obsessions, a furious letter writer. It was really an obsession. I don't think anyone has written as many letters as he has in a given day. He wrote letters with his right hand. He was right-handed. When his right hand got tired, he used his left hand. When his left hand got tired, he dictated his letters, but he could never stop writing letters, which is very good for history, because every passing shade of his emotion is contained in it. His estrangements with his eldest son, form of letters. Unfortunately, his eldest son's letters to him are not on record because they haven't survived. But his letters to him and to his other sons and to their wives, and to his extended family, those who became leaders of India, Nehru, Prime Minister, Patel, Deputy Prime Minister, and many others, like Azad, Education Minister. So letters were his medium of instruction, medium of communication, medium of expression, and also when during his imprisonments he was allowed to write letters, he seized the opportunity and wrote dozens of letters every day. Now, not all of them are particularly important or interesting, but some of them are. And I think Sanjay may have some more questions on that.
Mr. Gandhi, he was a very controlling father. Every letter sort of instructs the son or the wife or whoever what to eat, what to do, where to travel, who to go and speak to, and that they must respond back immediately.
That's how he described his own writing of letters and giving of instructions as scorching. Now, the first letter that he writes to Devdas, his youngest son, it was in the year 1914, the first letter. It starts with, "You have a very bad handwriting. Improve your handwriting."
Which he continues through pretty much right through. Every odd letters, you really must work on your handwriting.
His own handwriting was no great deal. But he acknowledges that, and he says, make sure your handwriting is not like mine, improve it. Then eat frugally, regularly. Exercise regularly. Constant instructions. But invariably, as he grows older and the sons grow older, if you are very keen on marrying so-and-so, you may do so, but I don't think you should do so quite yet. I think you should think about it. Don't make the mistake I did of marrying so early. Think about it. I have many reservations about your infatuation with that girl. I think it's infatuation. But test yourself. I'm telling you very seriously, don't rush into it. But of course, if you're very keen, go ahead and do so.
We'll come to the love bit of it in a bit, but much of his letter was instructing his sons and his larger family to drink milk. I mean, there was obviously nothing called lactose intolerant at that point of time, to look at the diet, and he himself experimented with his diet through his lifetime, sometimes only having milk, sometimes only having raisins and nuts, and of course the times when he fasted.
It is said very correctly that when he ended a fast, which he did several times, most often for important political reasons, and he had imbibed the practice of fasting from the great Jaina tradition and the Hindu tradition, aware also of the Islamic tradition of the holy month of Ramzan being a month of fasting, and the practice of Lent in Christianity. But he took to fasting both for what he calls self-purification and for political reasons. But he never said, I'm now going to fast unto death. He said in his last fast that it's a fast with no terminal date. But very often he said 21 days fast, 7 days fast. But he never entered a fast with a desire to die or with the intention to die, but with the intention to make the fast do something for him in terms of what he calls self-purification or in terms of reaching the political goal that he had in mind. Which was a kind of, and one might ask this question, this person who believed in non-violence, was fasting entirely non-violent? Did it not coerce the opponent? This question was put to him, and he said, you're not wrong, but it is not meant to coerce as much as to touch the person's heart. Now those at whom the fast was directed, I think, felt pretty much coerced. And I think they felt very often that they had lost the moral ground, if they had any, to this man who was fasting. But he was not fasting as a master of a tool that was working, but as a person who genuinely believed in going into the depths of his own soul, never with hatred or any kind of malice, and always very, very prayerfully. And so his fasting, like his great marches in South Africa and India, were expressions of his own personality. But he did not advocate fasting to others. He did not advocate initiatives like marching as an all-time prescription. No. These were things which he had himself refined and given to himself. His wife always despaired of these, and because she had to bear the brunt of it, and I'll pass on to Sanjay's next question. But before I do so, must say about his wife, who was an extremely intelligent woman who knew her husband and her husband's extremely unpredictable ways and his growing spiritual stature. At one stage, he said, I am not going to drink any milk. Milk is what Sanjay had referred to. So I'm not going to drink any milk. It's bad for me in every sense. And when he started fasting and losing energy, his doctor said, if you don't drink, you are a vegetarian. And if you don't drink milk, you're going to die. If that is your intention, well and good. But if that's not your intention, you better drink milk. He said, no, I'm not going to drink milk. And so death was sort of written. When his wife comes up with this response, now, you said you won't drink milk, right? Yes, you know that. So when you said you won't drink milk, you meant cow's milk, right? Yes, of course I meant cow's milk. You didn't by any chance think of goat's milk, did you? No, I did not. So you can have goat's milk. The doctor would have blessed Kastur. And he did change over to have goat's milk. He said, she's right. I'm going to die. My intention is not to die. And when I said I won't drink milk, I meant cow's milk. So it may not be a bad idea to try goat's milk. And there's another occasion. This is, I think, slightly apocryphal, but not wholly so. That on the very day that he commenced a fast, which was going to last pretty long, he had placed an order for a new pair of dentures.
What is really interesting in the book and the books is you see how Gandhi challenges his own body. But the other thing that he does is he challenges the police. And in Champaran, the first time when he's at the end of this particular protest, when he goes to the railway station and he thinks he's going to be arrested, but they don't arrest him, he's disappointed. And each time he sort of looks at being arrested by either the police of himself being arrested or any of his family members, he's like, okay, now you'll be arrested, which is really a medal for him.
Jail going was inaugurated for him in South Africa, and he went to jail all told but 10 times, 6 times in India and 4 in South Africa. And they were defining experiences because he spent a lot of time in jail. The jail terms were very long. But in a very curious way, he looked forward to being in jail for a few reasons. One is he knew that his being in jail was doing things for his political causes which were beyond his own capability. If he had not been in prison, he would have been active, he would have been doing all that he wanted to do. But his being in jail energized his political cause in South Africa and in India in a way far beyond his normal activities might have. So he looked forward to jail because he knew that it was almost an unintended investment in Swaraj, which was his goal, independence for India, self-government for India. But he also looked forward to something else in jail, which is very relevant to our meeting here today. He looked forward to being in jail so that he could read books. He loved reading books and hated himself for not having the time to do so. And it must be said for the British Raj that its jails had decent libraries. It must be said for them. And you will be interested to know that in jail, different jail terms, he of course read the Bible again and again, saying that the Old Testament puts him to sleep, but the New Testament gives him life. And he read the Ramayana, his most favorite Indian text, but he also read Jekyll and Hyde. He also read Tom Brown's School Days, Kipling. He enjoyed Kipling. He read Jungle Book too in jail. And I'm very glad he did, because I think it sharpened his sense of humor. It's also sharpened his sense of the animal world. Jails were for him libraries. There are, it just so happens, talking of books, about 10,000 books written on Gandhi. 10,000, of which about 4,000 are in one library alone in Delhi, the Jawaharlal Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. And his own most successful book, his autobiography, is sold about 2 million copies during the copyright. And now the copyright is over, the time period having lapsed. Uncounted. So his life in jail was also his life with books. And he wrote his autobiography in jail. He couldn't have had the time to write it if he had not been in jail. So, jails have their own uses.
What is amazing is that even when he was in jail, or when he was not, and he was leading protests or marches across the country, every time there was a violent incident that resulted from that, he immediately stopped and said, either I will fast to be able to atone, or he walked to those places where there was violence. And he stopped what he started, which was that particular protest.
He believed famously that the ends were as important as the means were as important as the ends, that the two were indistinguishable. And Nelson Mandela very famously said, I was working in South Africa for a short time, and I had the privilege of hearing Nelson Mandela say this. He said, Gandhi taught South African struggle disciplined mass protest, organized disciplined mass protest. These are Mandela's words, which means that nonviolence is crucial to the volume of the protest. And the two have to go together. If there is volume and violence, it's doomed. So Mandela saw this, and the intrinsicality of non-violence to his struggle, Gandhi's struggle, made him look out for any breaches of the non-violence creed in his protests very intently. And he would curb and stop, modify, sometimes completely suspend the struggle if there was any break in the principle of non-violence. Now, many of you may have seen this film yesterday, which we were privileged to see thanks to JLF, Ahimsa. Ahimsa is a Sanskrit word, it's a compound. There are Sanskrit scholars in this gathering who will sharpen what I have said. Is a negative prefix, which means non or un, like ahistorical or a-religious, not irreligious, but a-religious, non-violence. Himsa is violence. But as again said yesterday, non-violence was much, much more than the abstention from physical violence. It had a very strong positive side to it, which was nothing other than trust in the opposite number to change, faith in the possibility of change, a possibility of transformation. Most significantly, there's a riot that had broken out in 1924 in a place called Kohat in the northwestern frontier province of India, when a large number of Hindus had been attacked. And Gandhi was then staying in a Muslim friend's home in Delhi, Muhammad Ali. He was a great leader. And without consulting anybody, he just decided on a 21 days fast. And everyone said, because a man was not so young, he was not very old either, but 21 days fast can go anyway. And 21 days fast could not be 20. It had to be 21. But it immediately saw the end of rioting. And the same thing happened repeatedly, most famously in the city of Calcutta, where he was on the day of India's independence, shortly after which there were riots. And he again decided to, this time, fast until peace was restored, which it was fairly quickly because of this moral stature of the man. And again, finally, a few days before his assassination in Delhi, he was this time fasting in free India. And there was no difference in his mind between an India that was free politically from colonial subjugation and an India that was not, when it came to Hindu-Muslim unity, Hindu-Muslim friendship. Communal harmony, Hindu-Muslim particularly being the biggest communities of India, and the harmony between the castes in India were for him as important as freedom from political subjugation. And he went on this fast in Delhi, and it was directed at what was his own government. And it just so happens that we learn that later, when all the communities present, including a visitor in the shape of the High Commissioner of Pakistan, who said that many Muslim women in Pakistan in Parda are praying for you, Bapu. And all of them said, we guarantee that there will be no more violence. This very old, by now really old man, 79, broke his fast to find that Nehru, the Prime Minister, himself, without saying this to anyone else, had also been on a fast during the same time, following his master's example. Now, mind you, Gandhi was 79, fasting and doing nothing but fast. Of course, he was writing letters. But Nehru was Prime Minister. He was doing everything that is required of a Prime Minister. But he too was fasting. And when Gandhi learned this, on the day he broke his fast, he sent him a letter saying, in Hindi, may you live long and be a jewel of India. Jewel being the English translation for Jawahar, which was his name. So this was the man that we're talking about, wise and witty and brave and humble and courageous. And on the note which Sanjay had introduced at the beginning, the connection between family and the larger family. On this last fast, his son Devdas writes to him in his last letter, saying, Bapu, you should not be fasting now. You are old. You can do much more by being strong and living than by fasting and perhaps dying. And Gandhi says, no, if my Rama has asked me to fast because I cannot live in free India where Indian hates Indian, Indian kills Indian, and when Hindus in Pakistan and Muslims in India are afraid, my Rama tells me I must fast. And if he wants me to end the fast, he will create a situation when the fast is ended. Kasturba had died by then. She incidentally had died in a British jail. The last imprisonment of Gandhi and Kasturba was in 1942 to 44. She was ill and old. She had not been imprisoned, but she had been allowed to be with her husband where she wanted to be. And she, after long illness, had died. And that's another letter from father to son, son to father, in which it's a very poignant letter. So Gandhi was quite alone by the time he took his last fast. And it had an effect in both countries. And I think those who read that transaction today of letters, exchange of letters between Nehru and Gandhi, between Devdas and Gandhi, will realize how important it is for the future of our subcontinent to keep the communities of India free of hate, suspicion, and violence.
One of the things that you see in the letters is that, of course, he continued to push back against this sense of division with Jinnah, and also as far as caste divisions with B.R. Ambedkar, where he broke with B.R. Ambedkar's request that the castes get a separate representation. And that's one of the reasons why the roundtables failed, because Ambedkar and Jinnah continued to insist on their separate identity and their separate representation in the then parliament.
Baba Saheb Ambedkar was and remains an outstanding Indian figure. And it is he who piloted the drafting and the crafting of the Constitution of India, which gives India not just social, economic and cultural, intellectual, political rights, but a whole sense of justice. The Constitution of India begins, the preamble begins with justice. Much before equality, liberty and fraternity, justice. That was Ambedkar's goal, and that's how the Constitution has, in India, become so vital a document. Gandhi and Ambedkar differed on how the Dalit population of India should find its elected representation. Ambedkar was for separate electorates for the Dalits. They were not called Dalits then as they are now. Ambedkar said Dalits should vote for Dalits, and Dalits elected by Dalits should have a certain given number of seats in parliament and in the state assemblies. Gandhi said, but that divides Dalits from the rest of India for all time. We should have reserved seats, not separate seats, by which he meant that everyone should vote for Dalits and Dalits alone in certain constituencies, so that a certain critical number of Dalits get elected. And he gave a formula by which more Dalits would have got elected that way. So there was this difference. But again, after a marathon fast, during which marathon consultations also took place, Ambedkar accepted Gandhi's scheme, perhaps without being fully persuaded by it. But he did. And it is to the great credit of both that a system has come into place today by which a very large number of Dalit representatives, a constitutionally arrived at number, represents Dalit interests in parliament and in the state assemblies. But more than that, gives Dalits an opportunity to participate in law making for the whole country. And we have to be eternally grateful for Gandhi and Ambedkar having arrived at that formula in what is called the Pune Pact. The Jinnah story is different. It didn't work. Jinnah did get what he wanted, which is Pakistan. I won't go into that story because many of you saw the film yesterday know about it.
One of the things about Gandhi was that he was exacting. And in a letter to Devdas, he writes, Ba, which is Kasturba, has been stealing, and Chhagan Lal, who's his secretary, has been stealing as well. And a letter thereafter, maybe 2 months later or 3 months later, again writes that Ba has accepted that should she do this again and steal, she will leave my side voluntarily.
Now, here I must tell you what stealing meant. Stealing in this case meant that visitors who had come and given certain subscriptions to the ashram had for a while been retained by Kasturba, the amount being something like 1 rupee or 2 rupees.
And a few annas as well.
Little beyond the time by which it should have been. So in Gandhi's terminology, this meant Kasturba's stealing. And Kasturba must have smiled as Gandhi said this. And I don't have her exact words, but she must have told him, Bapu, because she had also started calling him by the popular name Bapu, if it serves your purpose to establish the financial rectitude of the ashram by making my slightly delayed remittance an act of stealth, go right ahead. That's what she must have said.
And the other letter that was fascinating is he asks your father Devdas to send him an account of every Naya Paisa. And then he writes back, he says, I've received it, I haven't examined it, but I will do so in due course. And then in another letter, he writes to Devdas saying, I have examined it, by and large, it's okay. However, I have a few thoughts that I would like to present to you in terms of the way you've maintained your accounts.
Financial rectitude, non-violence, moderation in food, celibacy, all these were integral to his life. They seem to me, certainly in many ways, to be rather extreme. But to him they were not. They were all of equal and simultaneous importance. Which is why he was so unique. Which is why he was so difficult to follow in a complete way. But which is why he set a gold standard, which is a bit of a oxymoron, because he and gold had very little to do with each other. But he set a gold standard, which is very important in a time when standards have become very, very low. And while on the subject of financial rectitude, I think I should just end by saying, this man who had no money of his own, no bank account, probably collected more funds for public causes, more money passed through his hands than through the exchequers of the governments of India. People gave to him spontaneously, lavishly, and because he was he. Probity for him was not negotiable. It was taken for granted that what is given to Gandhi goes to Gandhi's cause. So he was the richest pauper in the world.
The other really fascinating thing is that Gandhi maintained some of the best relationships with some of the wealthiest in the land, whether it was Ghanshyam Das Birla, who was one of the preeminent business people, who was in business with the British, or the Garodias, or so many others. How did he do this balance? And his letters sort of suggest that there was that balance at some level.
He had this concept of trusteeship. He said that he is not a Marxist, he's not a socialist in the sense in which those two phrases are understood, but he believes that all wealth has to be held in trust for the people, which meant that a certain amount of honest profiting was not incompatible with holding money in trust. So as long as an industrialist paid his taxes, paid his employers the wages that are legally and morally due to them, that's all right. He was clear in his mind that land, agricultural land, would have to be taken over by the state if large landholders don't voluntarily dispose of them. So to that extent he was some kind of a socialist. But essentially he was not against wealth. He was against the hoarding and the profiteering that goes with wealth. And I think crony capitalists would have averted his gaze like they would avert truth.
We've been given a time to wrap up, but I'm going to ask you two quick questions. One is, can you tell us what was his objection to your father falling in love with your mother, with Lakshmi? And he continues to say, not now, give it a thought, wait for a while. And now Devdas is 33, and then finally, after a whole period of consideration and jail term, they find an occasion where they can get. And yet Lakshmi was a friend, was a daughter of one of his closest companions and friends, Rajaji, Rajagopalacharya.
I and my siblings are eternally grateful to both of them for having finally said yes, because we would have been nowhere on the face of this earth if they had said no. But that apart, I think this is because he respected love. He did not want love to falter and fail at the altar of infatuation. Where will love hide its face if so-called or seeming love collapses in a hasty marriage? I think it is because he saw that his own marriage had survived great vicissitudes because of the wisdom of his wife. And theirs was not what can be called a love marriage, it was an arranged marriage between the two families. The strains and struggles of his own marriage, he projected into the future marriages of his children, and he did not want them to suffer. And he writes in one of these letters to Harilal, when they're getting married, do not treat your wife as I have treated your mother. I want your marriage to be a marriage of equals. This is what has made him, I think, very popular with his daughters-in-law and continues to be very popular with his granddaughters-in-law.
Before opening it up to the House, last two thoughts, Mr. Gandhi. One is that you said Gandhi was the gold standard. This is a legacy that you all wear around your shoulder. Do you find it a burden? That's part one of the question. And part two, as you look around the world today, especially India, love to hear your comments of how you view it. In one way, as a public servant, you've been the governor of a state of West Bengal, you've served as an ambassador and high commissioner in different parts of the world. How do you see India today and the many challenges that we face, especially the challenge of hatred and violence and the challenge of the narrative that we're seeing around us?
Two very important, very difficult questions. The first is answered a little more easily. I'm borrowing a phrase used by my brother Rajmohan, who was in the film yesterday. It is a privilege and a weight. But I will modify that to say that where it is a weight, it is very strangely a rather pleasant weight. Your questions to me are a challenge. But am I not enjoying this gathering? I am. Potholes close and doors open for me because of the surname that I bear. But it is also true that all Gandhi descendants are observed very closely and critically, and sometimes a little unfairly, for like him, his descendants are also very fallible, and they're just regular. I love this American expression, guys. Guys and you can say that guy, and you can say that Gandhi was a great guy. You don't mean it in anything other than affectionate respect. So Gandhi was a great guy, and his descendants try to be not great guys, but okay guys. And as to India today, India has been and is an open book. Yesterday we heard the great United States statesman say that he once told Barack Obama that he would not have been president of the United States were it not for Martin Luther King Jr. and M.K. Gandhi. I believe in whatever is happening in India, that is, and in Pakistan and in Bangladesh and in Sri Lanka and in Myanmar, Nepal, Afghanistan, whatever is happening is the legacy of suspicion, hate and greed, things which Gandhi wanted India to move away from. But those standards are there, and those standards are seen as a challenge and an example. And I think if somewhere Aung San Suu Kyi, in her present imprisonment, sees the influence of Gandhi and the Buddha in what she should be doing and she should have done, I think we should drive some satisfaction. And if in India today the opposition and the government both feel the need to refer to Gandhi time and time again, it just shows that he is what he was, the source of a scorching love. A love that loves, but a love that scorches. And goodness knows that we deserve all the scorching that we get from his gaze, and need the love that he so unhesitatingly has given to people who were his colleagues, to people who were his opposite numbers, and to the unborn. And I'll close by saying that there was this lady called Mary Bethune, great American woman, who set up what was then called the Association of Negro Women, now I'm sure called something else. And she said, after the assassination of Gandhi, that when we mothers hear the roar of jets carrying bombs and think of the unknown horrors of germ warfare, we will thank our stars that a man called Gandhi lived amongst us. the mothers of India and the daughters of India are Gandhi's truest descendants.
Questions from the audience? Any questions? Philip, at the back, there's one question there. Yep. And was there one from this side? Did anybody? And Sienna from here. And I'll come to you.
Is it on? Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, this is really not a question, but kind of a comment. I've taught courses on Gandhi and...
Philip, can you just hold the mic like this because we're not being able to hear?
Are you hearing now? Is that good?
Can you hear?
Can you hear?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yo, it's really a comment coming out of your pointing out how Gandhi was such a furious correspondent, letter writer, constant. And as you know, he also had kind of a love-hate relationship with technology, industrial technology, and in many ways anticipated the rise of environmentalism, which I think is another one of his great accomplishments. But I always think that had the internet been around and texting been around, Gandhi would not have been able to resist it because of his constant wish to be in communication with people. And I wondered if you ever think of that as well. He would have been text messaging furiously.
Had the internet been around, the internet was not, but many other forms of communication were around. He used the telephone and the telegraph to differential effect. He boycotted the British Raj in many ways, but he did not boycott the postal department and did not boycott the telegraphic department, and I think gave them a fairly steady revenue. He would have had his reservations about the internet. Now we are talking about something which is completely hypothetical and almost belongs to, well, what can be called spiritual science fiction. But I think he would have bent that technology to his cause. But more than that, I think that technology would have bent to his needs. For today, the name Gandhi, if you Google, brings up a whole lot of stuff, much of it sheer bunk. Falsehood. But somewhere the real Gandhi stays and remains totally beyond what can be called corruption. There is no virus that can reach the truth of Gandhi, even on the internet.
What is amazing, Philip, when you read it, you'll see that he's written letters every day from a different location, whether it's on a ship or a train or wherever. And he receives letters, and I think that was the incredible postal system of that point, that he was able to do that on a daily basis, writing 6, 7, 11 letters, not just to people in India, but South Africa and across the world. Senna, you were going to ask a question. Could the mic come here, please?
We only have about 3 minutes, but don't despair. Mr. Gandhi will be downstairs signing his book, Scorching Love. So if you don't get a chance to ask a question...
And he's around for the rest of the day, so you can catch him. He'll be happy to chat.
That is what is meant by having the weight of the descent.
Okay, just one more, please.
Yes. Obviously, I'm a big fan and have studied Gandhi and find him to be a complicated person. And the most complicated aspect of his life was his sexuality. You know, his abstinence, his marriage at early years. What can you tell us about that?
Can you repeat the question? I got the
What
hang
the
of
most
it.
complicated aspect of his life was abstinence from his early age, and what can you say about that?
Well, my first response to that is, I'm very glad and grateful that Gandhi's adoption of celibacy came after his 4 sons were born. But this is not answering your question. His position on celibacy is part of a great tradition across all traditions in the world of that extreme abstinence. It is not to be judged by the non-celibate world, but by the traditions of celibacy which are there in every tradition across the world and have been there since the ages. He was one of the masters of celibacy, as he was the masters of the theology behind celibacy. Things which I have absolutely no intellectual resources to understand. And I must say, I have kept away from studying it in anything like depth.
What is interesting is, again, in the letter, at some point, Gandhi alludes to the fact that he takes responsibility and he says for his eldest son, Harilal, and the problems that Harilal faced by saying, Harilal was born of my lustful phase, and therefore it all happens. But on behalf of all of us here at JLF and the Boulder Library and the Boulder City, a big thank you to Gopal and Tara Gandhi, ladies and gentlemen, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming. In many ways, this makes up for, sadly, the boycott that Gopal faced in New York, where a few people came to listen. But thank you all for stepping out. And really, it's been an honor and a privilege. And his book will be available downstairs. This particular book, like I said, may well arrive at the Boulder bookstore later. But the earlier book, Restless as Mercury, is downstairs, should you wish to buy it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Abigail.